Welcome back, listeners, to Lost and Searching, where we have deep and important philosophical chats to help people discover and cultivate their greatest inner leader, that self-development, personal development work, by answering challenging questions about ourselves, about the inner leader, about the person that we are within from a variety of different dimensions, so that we can get a better grip on how we transform our own lives. And so we speak to all kinds of really epic people who can help us dissect certain parts of that. And today I'm speaking to a good friend of mine, Amar, the co-founder of a community organization called the Bay HQ, British Asian Entrepreneurs, to support those in the UK in business from those diverse backgrounds. This is as and after recording over 350 podcast episodes for a variety of different content series over the years, speaking to some of the biggest entrepreneurs in the world, the likes of the former founder of Twitter and so many more that we talk about today, switching his career multiple times, writing and getting hundreds of thousands, if not millions of views in total across article writing and much more. And this was after a career in tech himself. So he has a lot of experience that changes the way we look at leadership, but the way we look at the way we approach our own leadership. He has so many insights from so many really successful people and a fantastic energy to help achieve it. This is one you will not want to miss. And before we get into that episode, I just want to take a sec to say a big thank you to those of you who have been here. This is the final episode being released in 2024, and this is after 2.5-ish really full-on months getting into the show, getting lots of your feedback, getting lots of support, making lots of improvements, and so much more. It's been amazing to see, and there's far more to come. We've passed this threshold that most podcasts never get to of 20 episodes, and I've already recorded over 30 in the new year. I'm expecting over the course of the year to release something like at least 100, if not more, and there's so much more depth coming as this show gets bigger. And the way you can help is by sharing this around and following it yourself. By hitting the follow button wherever you are, whether that's YouTube or Spotify or Apple or wherever, by regularly listening and by sharing whatever you like with those you think who also need some of the answers to the challenging questions we bring up on the show, you're helping not just me, but me to help you and make it even better by bringing even more really incredible voices, bigger and better to you, and doing it as soon as we possibly can. So if you want to radically see change and help bring that change to more people, the easiest thing you can do is drop a follow and share it around. I really appreciate you. Those of you who have been here since the beginning, I see you. Those of you who are just joining us now, I see you, and I appreciate you all equally. Thank you so much. And with all that being said, let's get into this episode. There's a lot of things I want to pick your brain about because you have created 300 podcast episodes over that yourself, and then Bay HQ has done another 200. Is that right?
So episode 200 I'm recording this week for Bay HQ.
Wow. Okay.
And then for the other podcasts, so it must be about 370 altogether. Okay. So it's 300 including.
Okay.
So I need to pay attention to when I always forget when the 400th episode will come out, but it was 98 for Entrepreneur's Handbook, 58 for Mindful and Driven, and then 200 for, so what's the maths on that? 298?
I don't know, not a
just over 350. 360, yeah.
Yes, we've been caught on camera not being math people. Anyway, That's okay. And so as someone who has done all of that, there is so much I want to pick your brain about today, but I need to know to start with, what has led you down this path of wanting to do that in the first place? Because we were just talking off camera about how much work goes into something that the results do not arrive for. The results do not manifest for sometimes a very long time. And it's something you really got to do out of love. Where does that love come from? So tell us your story and what's brought you to this place you're at now.
Oh, from the beginning? Where do you want me to start from?
From the beginning.
Okay.
Start there. Why not?
So So I was born and raised in a place in East London, near Ilford. So my growing up situation was much less like this, much like, yeah, you're right, how's it going? Yeah, well, go on. And my childhood was all like that, right? And it had this weird situation where a lot of people I grew up with, I went to a grammar school, people did very well. There was also a lot of trouble, there's also a lot of other things going on. So it's this weird paradox where it's not like I went to a rough school and there's always things going wrong. But it's also people were very intelligent too, but we didn't speak like the posh boys, or we didn't go to those kind of places. So at school, my school was like 95% ethnic minority. I grew up in grime, and that was my environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that surprises some people now because I've had to clean up my language in order to be understood. But there's an element who wants to retract on that and go back to a bit more my childhood, the way I spoke, and champion that a bit more. But when I went to university, in Bath, so it's the opposite situation where everybody there often came from much more privileged backgrounds than I did. And I never experienced racism. Nobody ever made me feel left out. But you start to internalize it yourself. You start to feel yourself, oh, I'm not quite fitting in. People don't understand my jokes, those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that was a bit of a struggle, just making sure that I was assimilating well. And in hindsight, it's such a good experience to have such a different schooling background to where I went to university, because now I can flip-flop a bit and I can work myself into different rooms.
Oh, the code switching muscle got switched on, and that's actually a good thing. Often when we talk about code switching, it's painted in a kind of negative context, I think, but it sounds like you see it more positively.
I think what the best thing about it is that you can understand and empathize with different people. So when people are so rigid in, I'm like this and this is how I've got to be, then it's harder for you to then imagine what other people's lives are like. So yeah, some of the people I went to university with might have been more privileged than me, but they had their own issues, they had other things going on. And it's so easy to stereotype people. Whereas when you live with those people and you get to learn more about their childhoods and their upbringings and the struggles they face, you also get to know how to speak to them and how to persuade them. And it's a big gap at the moment, say, in the investment world, is that 70% of investors went to private schools and only 7% of the UK population went there. So you've got to understand how to speak to people like that if you want to succeed in that world. And if you have never grown up around those people, you've never gone out with those people, it's harder for you. So even when I went to school, I used to go to karate, for example, and that's another type of background of people. And after university, I did loads of traveling, so I've been to about 50 countries. Going to all these different places, it enables me to see how other people react. And that's a good thing, I think, because then when you're explaining things, you can change your explanation, change the way you persuade people based on what's going to make sense for them. And you saw this with political, with Brexit, Trump, all those things, is that huge amounts of the population don't understand each other. And you can't persuade somebody you don't understand. You've got to see the world from their eyes and be able to then look at those stories and see how you can change it. So I think that switching between those two backgrounds really helps me to where I am today, because I can be in every kind of room and not feel like I'm an outsider anymore.
Okay.
But then after university, so I did a year at the Bank of England as placement year. So that was me being can I swear on this?
Yeah.
So I was basically the research bitch, right? So it's like, here's the stuff for the speeches, like, here, go and do this. Like, I was the donkey doing that work, right? Which was a really good learning experience. But I think at the time, I wasn't ready for it in some ways because it was so intellectually intense. So those of you who don't know, Bank of England, they're the ones who make the monetary policy decisions. I was sitting in the same room as them in the mornings before they make the decision. And these guys are way smarter than me, right? So these are some of the most intelligent people in finance in the country. And it's such a privilege that I got to be in that room. But at the same time, looking back on it, I just struggle because you just can't keep up with it. You're trying to switch on. So in hindsight, I wish I was a bit more switched on in that period.
How old were you though? 22 you would have been?
21, yeah.
21, 22-ish. Yeah. So like as men especially, our brains don't fully develop until we're 25. And
mine's still developing. Yeah.
There you go. It's developing, forever developing. There is an interesting challenge that we face where that means for a lot of our youth, our kind of early 20s and our pretty much our whole teens, we're just dopey. We're just like bleh all the time. And it is challenging to keep up. Have you noticed yourself as you're older now, like getting sharper almost?
It's interesting. I think I've gone the opposite way because
okay, I'll take it back.
Well, when I was younger, I think my intellect was much more important to me.
Okay.
So had I high IQ, I did really well on tests. I always did well in psychometric testing. But it was almost part of my identity because maybe I didn't have the confidence or the charisma that I do today. So for me, that intelligence part was such a bigger part of my personality, of that's something which I can be proud of. And now I think I'm so much better at the social intelligence, the emotional intelligence side of things. But then I'm less focused on just sheer problem solving like I would have been in the past. And when I was doing coding all the time and I had to problem solve, now a lot more of my time is spent on the more people side of things. And it's something I've been thinking about recently. So I had a week off recently about what do I actually want to do? Where do I want to spend my time? Because there's a huge part that misses that pure intellectual challenge of the mathsy stuff, the coding side.
Okay.
And I don't get to do very much of that anymore, just sit down and just smash something out. So for example, I built our website, right? And when I get to do some of that website work, I actually really enjoy it.
Interesting. Okay.
Because so much of my life now is talking and talking and talking. So when I get to just, here's a problem, here, how do I fix it? How do I go about this? That logical side of things, I miss that. And I do wonder if I'm losing some of my intelligence because I don't do that as much anymore as I used to.
Well, it's use it or lose it, right?
Yeah.
Because if you want to keep it, act and treat it like you need it. And so if it's something you really value, I wonder what would happen if you did more of it. Like how you would feel, just purely how you would feel, let alone like what the physical result would be.
Yeah, that's the plan, is I want to make more time for that work, which is more me get my head down, as opposed to always trying to do the social interactions and how do I manage this, how do I manage that. So as we hire more people in what we're doing today, that should enable that. And with that as well, so I went into tech consulting after university, and that really flexed that problem solving muscle, which is really fun, right? Because I never wanted to do tech consulting. The job title was more business consultant. And then once I started that, this is way more tech than I expected it to be.
Okay.
But it was a lucky break in some ways because I wouldn't be the person I am today if I didn't have that experience. But I wanted to get into banking. I wanted to get into strategy consulting. And people listening today, right, I got rejected by all those top places, right? I looked at it recently. So every major bank, every major accountancy firm, every major consulting firm, and I worked for a boutique consultancy firm. And that gives me a bit of it's a weird thing because so many people you meet in the startup ecosystem, the leadership, they've gone to big four, they've gone to a big corporate, and they've been through
I think
their
it's
systems.
a British thing. I think it's like that is what most consulting is here. It's either either you're an individual entrepreneur or you're one of the big four if you're a consultant. And though we get this funny, I think it's a bit funny, and I've heard this feedback from a few founders who've done well in my ecosystem, where they're like, I'm not sure why I would hire a consultant, especially because a lot of these consultancies hire people straight out of uni like you were, and it's like, consult me on what? You have no experience.
Yeah.
And so like, what was your day to day? Like you say it was more tech.
Yeah.
But what does that mean? What were you actually doing? And
so I guess
how
the
did it
point on that
impact
is
you?
so the first 2 years you're basically useless.
Okay.
And I can admit that because what you're doing is you're learning the code, right? And you're learning the tech stuff.
Okay.
So at that point, so it was a weird one where how the role shifted, different projects, right? For a lot of the beginning, you're more or less a developer, more than actually really a consultant. So the person ahead of you, the person, your manager, they'll be doing all the discussions with the company. And then you get given the requirements and you go and build them. And in those early couple of years, you're basically just learning by failing all the time. And then your person who, you get all your work checked and that person tells you did wrong. But then as it evolves over time, so I was there for 7 years, right? By the end, I'm just managing projects by myself. And also the UX element became a much bigger part of it. So I was doing much more design. I was using Figma. I could do everything from beginning to end, right? So I talked to the customer, talk to the company, see what's your problems, what are your requirements. Then I'd come up with a design of how to fix that. We'd then go through the user testing. I'd then actually build it. I'd then go through every single part of that journey. So if you think about how that translates to entrepreneurship, is that when somebody comes and pitches me a company, I know how long it takes to build. I know how difficult it is because I could actually build it. I can use Node.js, I can use React.js, I can use all of these different things that they will use. So it gives me a really good perspective that people often don't realize because I'm just a talking head, is I actually do know the tech side too. And that is a good baseline for where I got into, which is, I don't really play on it too much, but it's nice for me because when people talk tech to me, I do know what they're talking about. But that side of things, what I really started to enjoy is that ownership element of it, where you get a problem from the company, I'm designing the solution myself, I'm mapping it all out, and then I can actually build it. But the challenge is what happens is when you get further and further, it's harder and harder for a challenge to really excite you because you can start to do things fairly on autopilot.
Oh, I see.
And with the way the company was, is that it was looking at where's my next development point? Where can I next go? Because the way that the world evolved is that how companies would work when they hired us, they'd generally hire one of my people from my company to be the person in charge, but you'd outsource all of the other work to developers in another country. So I never got to have that general management of like being part of a proper team onshore and being able to do that. And that's one of the things I was quite worried about, is that's what I went for my career, say 7 years in, that I've never had somebody that I'm managing directly, properly. And that became a friction for me. But big challenge, I think, and probably there's many people listening to this now, where you go down a career path, it's not that you hate it, but it's just not what you think is right for you. But once you've been doing it for a while, how do you then shift? Because at that point, I knew nothing about startups at all. So you're looking at it like, okay, if I change careers now, I'm going to have to go down a few levels. And then are my skills transferable? I don't know. Like, I had no network, I had no nothing. And when you're in that position, you feel a bit trapped. And that's what I was in, where I'd always just do stuff on the side. So I danced, I did karate, I did travel as a way of escaping that. But I did feel like I was coasting and I just didn't know where I was going to end up. And for me, I think changed in nearly 5 years ago now. So January 2020, New Year's resolution, new year, new me. So medium.com, for those of you who don't know, it's the biggest writing platform in the world for long form blogs. I started writing on there just as like a new challenge, right? I'd been reading a lot. I'd had my little quarter life crisis and I was reading a lot of books. I was like, okay, as you read more and more, you start to pick up things you agree with and don't agree with. And this is what I always find funny about some people who read loads of books and they just agree with everything they read. So it's a no critical thinking that's going into it, right? If you're reading, and like anybody reading personal development now, you should be questioning what you're reading. You should be like, actually, that idea from this other book, I think that's a better fit for me. You've got to engage with it in that other way. Otherwise, you're just reading and not implementing, right? And that's what I want to do through writing. The idea through writing, I can explore these ideas that I'm having conflicts in from different things I'm reading from my own experiences and put them together. And that very first article went viral in January 2020. So that first article, over 100,000 people read it. That made me several £1,000s. And then all of a sudden, and people ask me, oh, how did you find your writing voice? And I don't know, and I just wrote something, right? It's like, that's the thing people forget. It's just, you can over sophisticate things, right? It's just go and do it and try it. And maybe you might have a natural knack for it. Maybe you've got something. And what happened for me then, so obviously the pandemic came into play in March of that year, which meant I had way more free time to write things in the evenings and the weekends. And I didn't actually have another hit for 5 months. So
when you say another hit, so you went 100,000 first article. Yeah. Next articles were what?
Like maximum, say 5,000.
Right.
But most of them would be 1,000-ish, right?
Okay.
But if you think about it in terms of the monetary aspect, none of the other articles maybe made more than £150.
Okay.
So of the first 20, 25 articles, let's say, the first article made me £3,000, and then none of the next 20 made me over 150. So that's roughly the way it was, right? So I could have very easily given up. I could have been like, oh, what's the point? Like, okay, I was just a one-hit wonder. So the bit that's actually the skill here, because the initial article was a fluke, right?
Okay.
But I kept learning, right? I kept engaging. I kept working, okay, how can I make my writing better? Or how can I do things in a different way? I joined Facebook groups. I was engaging in those. I was giving other people feedback. And what then happened is this massive purple period from, say, May of that year until the end of the year, where almost every other article I was writing was getting that hits.
Okay. And how often were you writing at this point?
So I'd say it was on average, say 4 to 6 articles a month. So I still had a day job, right? So I was still, and a lot of people play this numbers game, whereas I was a bit more intentional about it. I'd really edit things heavily. I'd be thinking about it. And by the time it came out, I just had a much higher hit rate than an average writer, because the average person would just write something and they're just putting out loads and loads of things to the world. And there's this element of, we talked, I think we mentioned this quite earlier about the Einstein thing of doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. It's insanity. So each time I was taking a bit longer to do each iteration, but I was really thinking hard about, okay, how am I forming my words? How am I doing this? What's my tonation? Am I doing this in the correct way? Am I making this? So the variation of the words, is it short sentence and a longer sentence and a very longer sentence, to mix up that roller coaster of the reading? There was a lot of thought going behind it at this point. So the first article, like, I did none of that. I just wrote something and it worked. But after that, it became more and more where I knew what I was doing. And then it became the editor of the main entrepreneurs publication on the platform. And that also massively accelerated my growth, because I was now reviewing, say, a few hundred articles a week and picking the top 30 of them to publish. So when you're analyzing that incredible amount of volume, you get a lot better at understanding, okay, this introduction is really boring. Do I do that in my own articles? Yeah, I do. Crap. And then you edit it, right? So that was a way for me to learn very, very quickly about what's good and what's not. And so by the end of the year, then I started outlining my day job. And if you remember, this feels like such a long time ago now, but beginning of 2021, you're starting to think about, okay, there's going to be a return to the office soon. And everything I was doing, it made sense because I could work from home. I didn't have a social life. And I now started thinking about, okay, if I'm going to continue this, then something has to give here, right? So in the pandemic, I had the job and the side hustles. And I had no social life because you couldn't, so it was fine. But as things opened up, you've got 3 things here, and 2 of them I can keep and one of them I had to get rid of.
Okay.
And which one am I going to regret the most? And it was February of that year, so I took a week off, and I actually made a little presentation of here's my business plan, all this kind of crap, and presented it to my family. And this is the thing I'm very lucky about, is my dad just was like, I don't know why you did that for. Like, I think you should do it. I believe in you. Like, it'll work out. You'll figure it out kind of thing. And for me, for somebody who went from that good school, good university, good grades, good consulting job, to my dad to be like, just don't worry about it. Just go and do it. It'll be fine. It was such a big boost because I've been so scared about people thinking I'm an idiot of like, I'm quitting my consulting job to become a writer, right? So I'm now in a world where that's not crazy. But from like all of my friends growing up, all the people I went to school with, all the people I went to university with, all the people I never worked with, that wasn't a thing that I'd ever seen somebody do. So for me, this is a massive identity shift. I remember the amount of anxiety I had in my notice period of like, have I done something stupid here? And I had a 3-month notice period. So that's a lot of time to agonize over your decision. And by the time I eventually quit, by the time I actually eventually left, then it was now that first year I gave myself to this experiment. And I did a lot of ghostwriting. I ghostwrote a book proposal for somebody. I think I wrote for like 100 startups. I wrote for senators. That was the main income source for that year. But that's where I started the first podcast in that year.
Okay.
And the reason behind the podcast, from the long roundabout way, is that once writing became my full-time thing, it was no longer a hobby. There was now pressure. So it's all great and well when you're making loads of money on the side because you have your day job, you have a salary, it's all fine. Once you need to make money from writing, it removes some of the fun from it. So podcasting, the idea back in the day was that it's just something for fun on the side. It's a new skill to learn. And as I mentioned, like when I grew up, I didn't have confidence. I didn't have charisma. Not that I have charisma now, but the idea of
I think you've got a lot. You generated a lot, and I don't think it's something you necessarily need to think about, right? It's like, do people like the energy you give across? And you've developed this fantastic energy that people really like. So I do think you've got some charisma. So don't play yourself down.
Yeah, but you can't say you've got charisma. You've got to let other people say it. So thank you for that.
Right, there you go. Okay,
I'm just setting you up for. I'm just fishing for the compliment. Yeah, but if you watch the initial episodes, they're terrible, right?
Yeah,
and you can see me kind of sweating through my top about how nervous I am as I'm doing it.
And when you say they were terrible, like what specifically wasn't good? Is it the questions? Is it the angles? Is it the what about it do you think isn't up to snuff?
I would say it's my demeanor of me being nervous.
Okay.
And that comes across when you're listening to a podcast and the person sounds nervous as a host. You shouldn't be feeling like, oh, I hope they're okay, right? That's not what the feeling you should get from listening to a podcast.
Okay.
But, and this is the thing which everybody forgets, is that you've got to be willing to suck to get good at anything. And so many people aren't willing to suck. So don't come to me saying like, oh, I want to start a podcast and I want to do this. Like, go and do 10 episodes and suck and get over that first. Because you will never be good straight away. Okay, you could pay for a podcast coach. You could get that really in-depth help. But otherwise, you just got to let it go and you just got to let go of the ego and just be willing to learn. And one thing I was quite lucky about is obviously because I already had the writing chops, a lot of my early guests were fairly major in terms of the amount of following they had because I had access to these people because they followed me, we were connected from my writing side. And again, the thing I say to so many people is, I think I said it to you when you were going to start this, is use your initial network first, who you're more comfortable with, who are going to be forgiving to your mistakes. Where so many people want to go for these big names at the beginning, why is that big name going to give you the time of day? And you want to be able to get good and learn your craft before you get those people on so that you can make the most use of it. You can leave the best impression on those people. Whereas when it's people you're already mates with, it's going to help you so much because they're going to give you good feedback and then they're going to be on your side. And so that was the initial podcast, was called Mindful and Driven. And the idea was about, because a lot of my writing at that point was about how do you, I think you're going to like this as well, about how do you be ambitious and go for your goals while at the same time not burning yourself out. And a lot of my writing was about that too. So initial podcast about that. Then as I was the editor of Entrepreneur's Handbook, the guy behind that asked me to start a podcast there. And that's one where it really started to go to the next level, because that was, you had to have a minimum of 100 million valuations come into that podcast, or 100K followers on Twitter or LinkedIn.
And how did you reach out to the guests for that? If the person who was running that was just starting a podcast, had you on as the host, how did you together get these guests on?
So because the platform itself, so Entrepreneur's Handbook as a writing platform, was huge, right? So we had like 1 million plus reads per month.
Okay.
So if I'm going to email you being like, hey, I'd love to get you on the podcast, we're going to send it to our newsletter of 50,000 entrepreneurs. If you're a B2B SaaS company, like that's 50,000 potential clients you've got there, right? And again, it's like a lot of the people who are writing for us, they were quite big name entrepreneurs. So you get them on first. It's all about the easy steps. Like what people try and do is skip ahead. Like, use your easy steps first, build those blocks, build that foundation. So the big first guest was the founder of Netflix. And I think is the only person where you look at that video and you just see me just shaking because I'm so nervous to be.
Wow.
I just couldn't believe I got the chance to talk to somebody like that at this point in my life, right? And the thing about him afterwards, for an hour afterwards, he stayed on the call, like, tell me about you. I want to hear your story. So when somebody at that level, who's got as much influence as he has, can be nice to you and be kind to you, then that's formed the way I engage with everybody else afterwards. Because I didn't give a crap how big you think you are. If the founder of Netflix can be nice to me and just kind, and it doesn't take much, right? Then everybody else can be as well. And that's the mentality I try to keep, right? You can say no to people, right? But you don't have to be cruel about it. You don't have to be unkind about it.
Yes, well, kindness is giving people what they need, not necessarily what they want. And what people never need is for you to be a dick, right? But people can receive no's or something that they don't want to hear in a kind way that gives them energy that is still pushing them in the right direction. And that does feel like a skill. It almost feels strange to say that kindness is a skill. We do live in a time which is very self-centered. And kindness can be challenging when you're making it all about you. And I'm wondering how much of these things you're describing you are now find yourself doing.
Oh yeah.
Right?
So
If you've and I want to hear about some of the the next biggest guests you brought on and things you learned from them, but it sounds like kindness is like a lesson number one here. Like you learn straight away what your biggest lesson was from guest number 1 out of 300 or whatever was to be kind, and here's how. How did you start applying that?
So I think one of the big things about, say, Mark Randolph, right, as the founder of Netflix, is that it took 4 months to get him on the podcast, right? So it's back and forth with his team. So he's set strong boundaries there. So when you are talking to them, he was very kind. But it doesn't mean we're besties. So it's that whole relationship between you can set boundaries, but when you're in a conversation with somebody and they're in front of you, be kind. And that's the balance a lot of people get wrong, right? Because it's, say, for example, you might have the same things. I have probably like well over 1,000 people a month message me. I cannot spend all my time just replying to people. And often it's a case of those people might not have done the work, or they're not relevant, or whatever it is. So the way I manage it now is I've got autoresponders everywhere. So if you message me on LinkedIn, you're going to hit an autoresponder, and that tells you to join the community, and it tells you, okay, here's the next events coming up. Because what I can't do, and I've got to be kind to myself on that, is I can't be everybody's personal concierge. That's not the service I'm selling, and that's not a sustainable path for me at all. But what it means is that if somebody is in front of me and they ask me for something, I can kindly say, okay, sorry, we don't do that. Or say, for example, a lot of people are like, I'd love to pick your brain about podcasting. And I say, okay, look, what I do at the moment is I have a blanket rule of I don't do that because of these different things. And I've helped those people in the past who then didn't continue podcasting. And that's just not a way that I can manage my time. But if you want to do coaching with me, cool, we can do that. But that's the way I can do it. I can say it in that kind of a tone.
Yes.
Rather than like, no, fuck off.
Yeah.
Right?
It's the setting a rule thing. Have you heard this? Like when people set it as a rule, people are much better at receiving it. We all grew up having rules placed on us, and we don't like it on one hand, but on the other hand, like it kind of worked. And
it's when it's fair, right? If if you feel like you're being singled out, it's just you that I'm not talking to, then you can take that very personally. If I say I just blanket do not do podcast, pick your brain things, it's different.
This is a rule I have put in place. It's nothing personal. It's that kind of objective tone. Yeah, I like this. Yeah.
Say even for the podcast now for the BHQ one. So you heard the rule for the Entrepreneur's Handbook is 100 million valuation or 100K, right? You can't argue with that, right? And same for the BHQ podcast now is say if you're a founder who wants to come on the podcast, you have to have at least 5 million in revenue or 1 million funding, which just makes it a lot fairer. Because before, people ask me, I have to try and analyze them. And I've got to try and make a subjective decision of whether or not they're good enough for the podcast, which when you're 200 episodes in becomes very difficult because you get a huge amount of people messaging you. Whereas if I just tell them, look, these are the standards we're looking at. It doesn't mean you're good or bad. It's that this is our target niche. This is what we're aiming for. And it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that I don't like you. It just means that our podcast niche of what the audience expects is founders got to this level. And there's other podcasts, people at earlier stages. There's other podcasts which have different criteria. And you're welcome to those. I'm not saying you're a bad person. And I think that's really hard because we're not used to rejection, especially at, say, work or school. We just do the next thing. We get the promotion, we get this, we get that. Whereas in the founder world, in the podcast world, personal brand world, you're going to get rejected way more than you get approved. You've got to have that.
There's no structure. There's no structure other than the ones that people have decided, which is a funny irony because that's all structures, right? One of the markers of growing up is realizing that no one knows what they're doing. When you were a kid, you thought adults knew what they were doing, but they didn't. No one knows what they're doing. People act, they pretend as if they know what they're doing because that creates the systems that we need and is when the system gets so much bigger than us that it feels like someone knows what they're doing and we can follow that reliably. We, as a founder, are going into a space where there are no systems, there is just my decisions, and I need to keep myself alive and energetic using those. I need to set my own rules. I'm creating my own path. There is no right way of doing things, or maybe better than others. So this is like a new question for you then, is like, how do you know when you're doing the right thing? Throughout this whole process, you basically jumped careers kind of 3 times at this point in the story, and then you could argue BHQ is like a 4th jump. How do you know these are the right jumps to make?
So I have this thing that I call the experiment rule, right? Of where it's very simple. If you're happy in what you're doing, experiment less and keep doing more of what you enjoy doing. Okay. If you don't enjoy what you're doing, experiment more and try different things. It doesn't mean that's necessarily going to be the right thing for you, but by experimenting, because what you see is so many people who are stuck in something which they don't like and they don't try new things. If you don't try new things, how are you going to escape that, right? So you think about when I started writing, is that I knew that I just wanted to try out new things, and that writing, it was an experiment and it worked out incredibly well for me. The only reason we're sitting here today is because I decided to write an article on Medium 5 years ago, which is nuts when you think about that decision, how much that's changed my life.
Yes.
And even the podcast, same thing, right? Is that I knew that the pressure of writing was becoming less enjoyable for me. So I started experimenting more. And that experimenting more led to the podcast, which then again led to another new path. And there's other experiments I've done which completely flopped. But that's okay, right? Because it's an experiment, it's the whole point. Experiments aren't meant to work every time, because then it wouldn't be an experiment, it'd be a certainty. So when I look at all these different decisions and things I've done, is I probably erred often too much on the accepting things and just trying new things all the time. And what I now need to get back to is some of that focus again of what do I actually enjoy doing? And let me do more of that again, because it's one of the hardest things about the founder world is that at the beginning, or when you're not doing so well, you think there's no opportunities out there. When things are going well, there's opportunities everywhere. And you just feel like every decision you do, you're missing out on something. And you've got to discover the joy of missing out, being like, okay, I'm not doing that thing, but I'm getting to do this, and I really love this.
I love that reframe. It's I get to do instead of I have to do. There's something I'd love to understand your perspective on that's just come to mind. There's a quote I've started using a lot that I love, which is, work is love made visible. So work is love made visible. The idea to me being that your job, if you're not loving it, isn't real work, or your definition of work is wrong, probably given to you by society, where work is this bad thing that we have to do to survive.
Yeah.
So it's this reframe on work, that work is really your love for the world, for people, for whatever service or change you're providing, made visible. And that might be different from a job. But that's a very contrasting view. That view contrasts a lot with, I've done this thing so much that I'm so passionate about it, and then it became work. So your writing, you did it out of passion and interest, and then it became work, and you lost some interest. If as soon as it becomes work, you lose interest, can it also be that work is love made visible? These two things sound like they're conflicting, and I'm wondering how to navigate that intellectually.
So I'd say with the writing side of things is that I was enjoying the process of writing itself.
Okay.
So that process stayed the same, me enjoying it.
Okay.
The challenge is that when it becomes your livelihood, and I guess if you look at the way you've reframed it there, right? So if you think about work as what you're putting out into the world, right, that you believe in. And sometimes I think as well, when you think about work in that way, it doesn't have to necessarily even be for money. So your work could be your charity work, it could be your parenting, it could be all these different things, right? It's in the way that you've described work there, it doesn't have to be how you make money. And with my challenge is that if you think about writing as my work, my passion at that point, then once it became the way I had to make money, then now I had to look at the numbers more. I had to look at, okay, how many views am I getting? Am I getting enough views? Okay, is this going to pay the bills? Whereas when I had my day job, then I was performing, well, did I perform better after I quit my job? I can't remember, but it was, now I'm doing this purely because I love writing. I don't need to think about how much money is this going to make. Every bit of money I made on the side was a bonus. And that was the framing. I think it was the pressure more than anything else that changed. That once there was pressure to perform, then it became less enjoyable. But now I'm rediscovering. So, for example, I've written on LinkedIn every day for 2024. And for me, that's a fun bit in the morning, right? You get to think about my thoughts, reframe them, work out how do I make this effective. Because the actual craftsmanship of the words itself, how do I put this idea? How do I make this idea more succinct? How do I make emotions come into that? That writing part of it is the enjoyment. Okay. And with the challenges is when that enjoyment. So there is some element now. I need these posts to perform because that's my lead magnet. That gets stuff into the business. But at the same time, it's also relationships I built through that. So, for example, I did the one where it's like me dancing at a VC event in Slush. And so many people saw that. And every time they saw me the next week, they all came up to like, oh yeah, I saw your dancing video, right? And even though it doesn't necessarily translate into a business ROI perspective, is the enjoyment of just showcasing those different elements and opening people's eyes up to things. So I really enjoyed that element. And that LinkedIn post, they're not necessarily making me money, but they are in some ways because it's building the brand out and it's a longer term view. But in a way, I'm enjoying that because I don't need to worry about, am I getting paid based on how many views I got on each LinkedIn post? And I think it's kind of the toxicity of some of the social media aspects, the engagement metrics, those things, which come into play there as well. And with long form, I think the challenge is now, like I said, I don't get as much time. And just going off a little bit of a tangent here, but when I started writing on Medium, some of the people that I interviewed in those early days, right? So Justin Welsh, Dickie Bush, some of these people who have got they're now making millions from their courses, from their writing. And one of the things they've done, which is very different to the path I've taken, is be very, very protective over their time. They've been incredibly efficient with their time. So what they can do is have their life and live however they want to do it. And they don't take many calls. They don't do many meetings. They do it often. They're often working remote. Some of them are on tropical islands in places, but they're making huge amounts of money.
Through writing.
Through writing and through content that they really love creating. Now, the difference I took, and I could have gone down that path, and there's an element of me like, that would have been so much easier in my life and so much less stressful. But I went down the path of, with the Bay HQ and what I do today, is about how do I channel this influence and power I've made to make a difference, and the difference in my personality between me and those guys is that those guys are often more introverted. And I say guys because, let's be honest, a lot of the time in the writing world, there was this bias towards guys, which is really strange because in the self-help world, more of the readers are women, but but more of the creators are men.
Okay.
And there's just this weird conflict here.
Okay.
And part of it is to do with, I think, the way people are conditioned and those things. But now there are more and more women creators coming out there and operating in these spaces, which is a really good thing to have that diversity of opinion. But I remember when I was writing on Medium, say 90% of the top 50 writers were men. And it's good now that there's different platforms coming out and this is changing. But with the BHQ path, what I've taken is that I wanted to have more in-person engagement because I was getting lonely. And with a lot of these writers, with all the people I've named there, all American. So in this year, that first year after I worked for myself, pretty much all my clients were American, all the people I engage with were American, all 8 hours behind. So I'm getting emails in the evening, all my work is coming in the evenings, all my friends have day jobs. So in the daytime, when I'm less busy, nobody's around. In the evening, when people are doing stuff, I've got to do interviews, I've got to have calls with Americans. And that wasn't really the freedom that I hoped for when I quit my job.
Right, okay.
So my challenge now is how do I engage with the UK ecosystem, right? And like I had never heard of colour in tech, I'd never heard of any of these things, right? And from that perspective of somebody who had quite a big Silicon Valley network and New York network, but I literally had no idea about the UK. And like I felt like if I went to a UK event or a London event, I'd feel like I was out of place and I wouldn't be able to be involved. And it was, you wouldn't go to stuff because, and maybe some people listening to this now feel that way. It's like, you're not going to go to an event because you're going to be the random odd person out and like the loser at the corner that nobody is like, oh yeah, right. And then other people were like, oh yeah, who's this rando, right? So one thing that happened is that, I think especially in my community, when I did try to start this out, so BayHQ is British Asian entrepreneurs, right? And it's the community for high growth British Asian entrepreneurs, operators and investors. But starting out is like, how do we, and the reason why we picked Asian initially is because we found this big problem with why aren't more people from my community helping each other? And like, we know there's great organizations for Black founders, great organizations for female founders, great organizations for LGBTQ founders, but Asians just seem to shit on each other and not help each other out. It's like, how do we change that mentality was the idea? And it came about because I gave a talk at EY and my co-founder's wife was like running that. And I basically said, like, I'd love to get more involved in the UK startup ecosystem, but I don't know anybody. Does anybody know anybody that can connect me with at the end, right? And she's like, oh, my husband works for a VC. So we had this chat, we basically this massive bitching, ranting session about how people don't help each other, everybody's shitting on each other with stuff. And I'm like, well, why don't we do something about it, right? And as well, I think all good ideas should come from that. You really frustrated with the way things currently are, and you think you can try and do something better. And I had the media background and he had the investment background. So we had different skill sets, which was good too. So initially it was just going to be a podcast and we'd do the odd event every now and again. And the challenge that happened for me and the big switch in so much my philosophy and so much of the way I think is my dad passing away in August of that year. So like I said, my dad was the one who believed in me, has encouraged me to do what I'm doing. He's always the person who cared more about my happiness rather than my success. And he did so much like so many people in the community, and he was the one who came from nothing and put himself to where he is. So I looked at it as like, now I'm in love with some level of power, right? How can I use that power in a way that is aligned with the integrity and the ethics and the person that I was raised to be, right? And that's what the BHQ has become. And there's been so many pivots and so many wrong turns and so many mistakes made along the way. And today, so we're 2 years in, so it's 200 episodes of the podcast, well over 2,000 people into the events. We've got, I think we've talked to over 1,500 students as well. We're doing pilot schemes with schools so we can get them into work experience. So the idea is that people from state schools, how do we get those people to be able to get work experience at a startup so that those schools are not open for them? Because when you apply to university, you have to put like your personal statement. If you come from a background where your daddy isn't a VC, how the fuck are you meant to get VC on your personal statement? How am I meant to show that I'm interested in this world or startup world? Because you've got no connections, right? And if we can do that for 100 kids this year, can we do it to 1,000 kids next year? Can we do it to 10,000 the year afterwards? But I think that's the way we can make a truly big difference.
Hey everyone, I wanted to take one quick sec to talk about a new partner that I am so excited to announce I have on the show, an agency called Untapped. Untapped exists to put your brand in the world's pocket with beautifully crafted, high-impact, mobile experiences. They've worked with brands like Barclays, EA Sports, American Express, and even the UK government. They're known for creating powerful apps with intuitive, seamless interactions that drive customer engagement and elevate brand recognition. But it isn't just tech development. Their expertise is bridging phenomenal quality technology with beautiful design to create the highest quality product possible that takes your users on a real journey with you. You may remember Will, the founder of Untapped, from episode 13 of the podcast. If you haven't heard that chat, I highly recommend it because it shows you what kind of no-nonsense, sleeves rolled up kind of people he and the team he's built really are, and it reflects in the kind of work that they do. They want to make their clients' work recognized across their industries and drive real game-changing value, something I've personally experienced and appreciated working with them myself. For businesses who want to take this next step in their journey, Untapped can help with everything from tech creation to brand design to product marketing and so much more. All right, the links are down below. Check it out. And now back to the episode. When you made this shift over to starting essentially a community organization from being a media person full-time, did that mean leaving behind the media stuff? Like you had, one career going well, jumped into media, then that started going well, then you jumped into something else. Does that mean you were leaving behind successful other writing and podcasts and things like that?
Yeah. So with the grief side of things, right, is that what happens is basically massive existential crisis. And now I can talk, like now I'm much more composed than I would have been even this time last year, just about that. I actually can't really remember 2023 very well. And it's one of the things I've come to terms with recently is because I was so on high alert all the time because of the amount of stress I was under, because of the grief and the, not shaming, but it's hard to imagine in some ways, just the amount of pressure I put myself under, because that was the only way I could cope. And it's not a healthy thing to do, but I knew, okay, I can't spiral here. I need to focus my energy somewhere else. So some people use alcohol, not a good idea. Some people use drugs, not a good idea. Some people do like different unhealthy habits, right? So it's like, okay, if I throw myself into building something which is making a positive difference, yeah, it's toxic as hell how hard I'm working, but at least I'm doing something good out of it, right? But looking back, I really have a really blurry memory of 2023 because I was in this constant state of stress and high alert, and like every day I'd wake up and my like face is like tingling and like that kind of level of like extreme burnout. But I couldn't stop because if I stopped, then the grief hit me. So it's this really difficult situation. And obviously the healthy, smart thing to do would be to actually take a break and like, look after myself. But I'm not as smart as like people might think I am. So instead I just carried on working until it broke me eventually. And then I finally took a week off. And that's why I've now made this like weekly, like this annual thing of taking a week off where I don't talk to anybody, I completely chill out. And having that week off just gave me a bit more perspective again. But what I tried to do in that year, like it's a chaotic. I don't know if I can actually explain all the different plates I had spinning, because the Entrepreneur's Handbook podcast still continued for about 30 episodes, 30 weeks, while the BHQ had started. So there was a point, say in early 2023, I was releasing 3 podcast episodes a week, 1 for Entrepreneur's Handbook and 2 for BHQ. And I was also still doing ghostwriting. So I was still ghostwriting for random CEOs and founders. So I had like 4 or 5 different things that were all taking up quite significant amounts of my time, that were all stressful, all different skills. And eventually, I think the BHQ got to the point where it was growing big enough. Was that, okay, I can now cut the other stuff. But again, when you look at that from sheer height, if you look at this from a cold, monetary perspective, if I was to make loads of money, what I should have done is move to Silicon Valley and leverage all the connections, all the writing I had out there, and I could be laughing now and making loads of money. I made a conscious choice, and even today I'm making a conscious choice to do the harder path for something that matters to me. And that's a constant conflict, right? Because for the first year, it's sheer compulsion. I can't do anything else because I can't think clearly enough to do anything else. I couldn't take a break. I couldn't reflect.
What was going on in your mind? Like if you had to describe the voices in your head, the the spiraling thoughts, what the day-to-day looked like that year, you know, I have a notion of the feeling of it was all a blur and I just don't remember it. Like hormones and chemicals took over completely.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us have a small amount of that. But to do it for almost a whole year, I mean, that's a long time. How much of it, like, can you remember? What can you share?
It's one of those things where if I think hard about it, I could remember specific parts.
Okay.
But in a way now, I must say so aggressively in the present. And it's probably because I don't want to remember it in some ways, because it was painful and it was difficult. But if I look at it from a daily perspective, it was just about, okay, one of the things I've always cared about how I do things and am I doing things in the right way? But that went on steroids and just went out of the roof in that year, where everything I was doing, if I upset somebody, I would beat myself up at it because, okay, I'm not living up to the standards I should be living up to. And it's one of the, okay, what I did unhealthily is that with my dad passing away, the way that I kind of saw it as honoring him is being the best person I can possibly be. But that's just such an unrealistic, impossible standard.
You think? As in, because you created the idea of what he thought the best person you could be would be, and it wasn't specific enough.
So it wasn't even that because my dad, I knew exactly my dad would be telling me off how much pressure I put myself under, right?
Sure.
This is something created by me, not by him. And it was the case of me being like, okay, this is what I have to be because I want to make sure that I'm so lucky that I had a dad like my dad. Like, I need to make sure that and when you're thinking like that, you just can't give yourself a break.
Yes.
And it wasn't from him, it was from me.
You're caught in the misunderstanding of who you think someone else thinks you are. So at any one point, there are three versions of you. Mm-hmm. There's who you think you are, who others think you are, and who you think others think you are. Yeah. And it sounds like what you did, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, is you conflated who you thought you were or wanted to be with who you thought your dad specifically thought you were.
I don't think it was that. I think it was self-flagellation. I think my dad would just encourage me to take a break. My dad, like even when my dad was alive, when I was working really hard before, he'd be like, "Oh, you should take more time off. Like, why are you working all the time for? Like, go and take a holiday." That's the kind of person my dad was.
Yeah.
It was me. It was almost like, I think it's one interesting with my dad. It's like, it's the, what is it? Like, be who like act the way I say, not the way I do. Because my dad would take on all the pressure himself.
This is probably why he knew how challenging it was.
Yeah. So I was, in some ways, I'm emulating my dad, even though my dad would tell me not to do that.
Yes.
So my dad would have been like, he would work really hard. He'd put so much pressure on himself. And I kind of took on that and the interesting challenge too is that at this point I was writing about mindfulness, right? I was writing to Nancy. So I stopped writing after my dad passed away pretty much as well. So it's like another element of what came into it there, because I was still writing a bit in that first year after my dad passed for my own brand. But once he passed away, there's like, I'm just a massive fraud, because I've written for the last 2 years about how to balance yourself and how to be intentional. And then this happened to me and I'm completely fucked. I'm now going against all the advice I gave him about burnout. I'm burning myself out almost on purpose. It's almost like a punishment. It's like a weird thing about, it's one thing that happens is obviously with like, say, like an Indian family, right? Is that at the funeral, everyone's like, oh, you know you're the man in the house now, you've got to look after everybody. And it's just that kind of pressure from all angles. And I just felt like I was you had the element of like, I'm not ready for this. I'm not good enough yet. So you just keep trying so hard to meet the standard. But if anybody actually knew what was going on in my head, nobody would have encouraged me to do that. There was nobody who knew me well enough that would want me to act in that way. But it's that element of myself of how driven I was to put that pressure on myself. And I think it was just a pure coping mechanism, right? Of just deflecting. Because rather than feeling the pain of the loss, it's easier to feel the pain of not being good enough. And it was just switching the problem out, right? Is that,
yeah, absolutely.
Because otherwise I'd focus on the loss and what I don't have and I'm never going to see him again, all those things.
Yeah. How did you eventually overcome this? You mentioned like a breakdown. And what often happens in these situations is sometimes things need to break down to be built back up better again. What was that breakdown for you, and then what happened after that?
So I think what really, when everything stopped, the wheels stopped turning a bit, was the 1 year anniversary. So in that 1 year anniversary, like it was like that's where everything really just became like chaotic. Whereas it caused me like a mania, right? Of just how much pressure, like, and it became unbearable. But at the same time, I'm the CEO, I'm the founder. I've got to do so. I'm keeping all those plates spinning, while also knowing that I just can't cope anymore, right? And I think what happened then, so it basically got a lot worse. And then during that time, it got worse. It eventually snapped because like I knew I had to snap out of it. Whereas when it was tolerably bad, not tolerable, it was better than most people were tolerable, but I was like, okay, I can keep going. Once it became so bad like that, it's like, okay, I need to stop. I need to take some time out now. And then what happened is, so it was a week in, so I organised TEDx Chico in 2023 as well, right? Because I'm a masochist and I choose to take extra things on my plate that I don't need to for no reason. So that was very stressful as well, and organising that for the first time. Now, like, I'm going to do it again, but it's a lot easier because I already know what I'm doing. But that was the first event I was hosting like that. And the week after that is when I blocked it out. So I think it must have been October or November last year. Last year, yeah. And what I did is I said, okay, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to talk to anybody. I'm not going to do anything productive. I'm going to sit here, read. I'm going to go to coffee shops. I'm going to just like get out of the country and just have my own space again. And I also don't know if it's how much of it is to do with taking the break, but it's a book that I really credit. I think it's an amazing book. So it's called 4,000 Weeks, and it's by Oliver Berkman. I don't know if you've read it, but
I haven't, but I'm very familiar with the concept. Yeah.
yeah. And it was the book that spoke to me at exactly the time I needed it. It was a perfect book for that moment in time.
I love when that happens.
And what the basic idea about the book is that you've got 4,000 weeks, which is like roughly 80 years, right? And no matter what you do, you've got 4,000 weeks. And it was, so one of the things, so I reread it last week because I had the break again, right? And it was like one thing is like cosmic insignificance, right? Is that the universe does not give a shit about what you're doing. We put so much pressure on us, like, oh, the universe is telling me to do this, right? The universe has got a lot of other things to care about. So when you stop putting yourself under this pressure, like the universe, this, or like your legacy, right? How many humans in the last 2,000 years are going to remember more than 1,000 years afterwards, right? Very few. So if you stop thinking, okay, I need to make a dent on the universe, I need to change the world, and stop thinking about it in that kind of sense, and instead just focus on what's in front of me, what good can I do today, what good can I do with in my limits. If everybody just did that, the world would be a better place. Whereas when you're putting the paralyzing amount of pressure on yourself that you have to be so amazing because that's the way that your life has meaning. Whereas if you actually think most lives are going to come and go, and in terms of the universe, it sounds weird, but it's like you're insignificant in terms of the universe, right? And when you accept that, you can just relax because you're not like a Superman. You're not going to change you're not going to change everything. But what you can do is do small tasks. Like we know there's like big problems in the world right now. So climate change, for example, there's all these wars going on. Can you do your little bit for that within your power? Because I cannot sit here and stop a war. I cannot do that. If I put the pressure on myself to do that, I'm just going to make myself incredibly depressed. What I can do is I can raise awareness, or I can donate, or I can do these things that are in my power. And when you think about your life in terms of that, okay, what's currently in my power? How do I increase my power over time so that I can make the differences I want to make where I can, rather than I need to figure out how I'm going to stop the wars. I need to figure out how I'm going to solve world hunger. Because that is not something a single human being is capable of. There's not a single human in this world who's going to stop all of the wars, going to stop climate change, going to do all of that. But can you do a bit? And what bit can you do? And what bit can you work with other people with to start making those edges in that way? And even with what I do, right, with BHQ, like, there are millions of problems in this world, right? And what I'm focusing on is, okay, there's this gap right now where people from my background aren't helping each other very much. Can we make them help each other more? That has ripple effects. If you do something good and it's small, that has a ripple effect on other people. If everybody just keeps doing things like that, you keep making more. If all you're focused on is the things you can't achieve and the things you can't change, that leads to that paralysis that I was talking about, and how I'd wake up in that fear every morning of like, I can't live up to it. And yeah, I think that book made such a difference just about, and there's a good question in there as well. It's like, how much do you judge yourself by who you ought to be rather than who you are?
Yes.
And that is a question that I needed, because I was putting myself, like, I guess it's an idea, it's about potential, right? It's that I've done these different things in my life. I've done high level this, high level that, high level this. The idea is like, I've got such high potential. I can do so many incredible things. That's actually, I'm all right. And like, I'm not that, like, do you know what I mean? But when you're putting these pressure on yourself, like, I can change the world. I can do this. I can be the one who does this. You're going to fail. Whereas, can you make the changes you can make? And the irony is by spending less time worrying about what you can't do, you actually get more done.
You have achieved a very strong sense of what I would label as purpose from this shift you've made, right? It's what I've noticed with you and following your journey over the last year or so that we've known each other. There's a very strong sense of purpose you get from the Bay HQ for you, which is quite specific and quite niche. You've literally broken it down for me before of like British and Asian and entrepreneur. It's like that is the niche, which is very niche. Whereas before you were reaching millions of people, yet this shift has been a very purposeful one for you, and it seems like it's really given you something. Would you describe that as purpose, and what would you say it's given you in more depth?
So this, one of my articles that I did the best of all the articles I did was about the concept of Ikigai, right? And have you heard of it before?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So I bet you've heard of it wrong, right?
Okay.
Because how it's portrayed in the Western media, right, is 4 Venn diagrams.
Yes.
Of, I'm going to forget one of them now, but so it's like something you're good at, something you can make money with, something whatever.
The world
right?
needs and what you love. Yeah.
So do you think Japanese monks from like 2,000 years ago decided that your purpose is where you make money? Like, think about Zen Buddhism. Is that the way that the Zen Buddhists would have thought? Like, oh, your job needs to be what gives you purpose? Or is that actually a very Western idea? That's
a really, really good point. When I think about Japanese culture in general, it's very, I'm a humble janitor and I still put a lot of love into what I'm doing. I'm not trying to make loads of money, it just makes me enough to survive. There can be love. It's back to that concept of there can be love in what I do. That doesn't mean I need to love what I do. The goal is not to love everything I do, because I'm not going to love, I don't know, taking out the trash, or I'm not going to love, I don't personally love like social media stuff. I'm not going to love trying to craft this, that, or whatever, so it games the algorithm. But there can be love in what I do, because what if the thing I'm writing is going to impact someone in a way that I really care about? So the idea of Ikigai, when you take it back to like origins, is more about reasons to live, right? So you don't have to have a single purpose. You have multiple purposes. Like, this idea of the single purpose, I think, can be quite paralyzing for people, is you have to find this one thing. What about if you think about it as reasons to live, right? What reasons do you have to live today, right? Let's say you wake up and you have your morning coffee, and that makes you feel good. That's a reason for you to get up in the morning, is you love that morning coffee. Let's say you walk through the park on the way to work, and you just love like hearing the birds sing in the morning, right? That's a reason to live. And there's so many simple, mundane things in life that are reasons to live. So when I look at purpose, is that I think there's an element of what I'm doing today. I don't know if it's what I'm doing, like my purpose my entire life. I want the Bay HQ to succeed. I want the Bay HQ to do different things. But let's say tomorrow something happens and I can make a really big impact in another space. Then I should be able to have that flexibility in my personality to say, okay, I think I can make a huge difference here. And like, I'm really going to enjoy that path. I can take that, right? And I can make sure the Bay HQ is doing the right things. And like I said, like Bay HQ, so mission is like 30 years plus, right? It's like, okay, for the school kids we're talking to today, can we help them get work experience? Can we help them get their first job in a startup? When they're ready to start their own company, can we be there? Can we help them? Can we get the funding? When they become a unicorn, we'll be the people that were there every step of the way, right? And that is something I think is meaningful in order to help people along every step of that journey. But it doesn't mean there's other things I don't care about too, right? And as my life evolves and shifts, so like right now, it's like I don't have any kids. But when I have kids, it could very well be that the purpose of my life is because I care so much about this little thing that for that bundle of joy, that is the purpose of my life now. I just care about that. And maybe that might happen. It could be at other points. So I think when I think about purpose in life,
I think it's something which can shift over time. I don't think you have to put the pressure on yourself to say this has to be forever.
Okay.
And with the Bay HQ, to me, the idea is it's almost like planned obsolescence. And I've talked about this before, is that, so we're 2 years in now, right? In 5 years' time, if you only know the Bay HQ because of me, I've failed. I want it to become an organization where there's multiple people, multiple different faces there, and where you trust Bay HQ more than simply trusting me. Because what if I get hit by a bus? Is the Bay HQ over? So that's the thing. It's about creating an institution. And if I can create an institution so long after I'm gone, it continues doing good work, that's made a difference there, right?
Yes.
Whereas if it only functions as long as I'm working 100-hour weeks, I haven't really created something here.
It's not become anything bigger than yourself if that happens.
Yeah.
And then what that's done is it's feigned purpose. Whereas what you're describing is I'm dedicating myself to something bigger than myself. And therefore you have something to get you up that isn't just you. You know, when someone is caught in like freelancer hell, right? It's called freelancer hell because it feels like hell to have to get up every day and do everything. When you have this sense of purpose, it's no longer the same. So you went from something that looked really successful on paper that maybe wasn't resonating enough within here, within the heart, within the soul, because now you have something that you can not just viably but visibly see is bigger than yourself in the way that contributes the way you want to the world. So that, I think, is a really beautiful way of understanding how that works for you. And I really wanted your perspective on something because last episode I recorded a couple weeks ago, my guest, Dami, he's a founder I've known for a couple of years now, doing really, really well. We got to this point in the conversation around purpose as well. It came up because we're going through some parts of his journey. And as someone who used to train entrepreneurs more linearly, I would outline mission, vision, and purpose. And what I think happened is purpose came into the equation like 10-ish years ago because of Simon Sinek's start with why stuff and things like this. Sometimes purpose replaced mission. Sometimes it was a different thing. It was more like, this is your why. And they can get very confusing. And then it's like, is any of this stuff actually useful? I had a chat with Dami and he said something very similar to what you just said. And I want to outline this for you and hear what you think. He said to me, let's take a hypothetical man. Between the ages of 0 and 20, so the first 20 years of his life, he's, a pretty good kid at school, goes to a school in like a rough area. The rough area school isn't doing so well. It doesn't get much funding. He then goes on to like win a trophy for the school or whatever through sports clubs. That puts the school on the map, makes the school more money. The school now has money to reinvest in the kids, and the school is doing better, and the other kids get more opportunities. Was that kid's purpose to win that trophy for that school? Okay, now he gets a bit older in the timeline. This kid is now between the ages of 20 and 40, starts a business, makes a lot of money, creates a lot of jobs, impacts a lot of people through the value that the business creates, sells the business, now has money, experiences, and impacted people. Was that his purpose? Okay, ages of 40 to 60. Maybe he's now giving back, right? Using some of that money to donate to things, starts a foundation, mentors people, gives back to the world. Okay, was that his purpose? Okay, what about the ages of 60 to 80? Now he's a grandfather and has a young granddaughter and trains her up and inspires her and is able to help her, teach her through all the business things. And long after he's gone, he's passed on from this world, she's grown up as an adult, has smashed a bunch of glass ceilings, and is impacting people in her own way. Okay, was helping raise that child his purpose? And so you go, are all these things therefore his purpose? Or is there no one purpose? Or is our definition of purpose random? And what I've realized is, okay, I've gone through, so this is now me personally, I've gone through this period of my life very recently where I've set out a totally new vision for the world I want to see and my mission in the world to help achieve that vision. That vision is much bigger than me. The mission is how I achieve that. I'm thinking, okay, where does purpose play into this if everything that we do is our purpose? Everything we contribute to, all the value we ever create is all our purpose. And I started to think maybe that means our purpose is to just be. That is why I'm here, is to just be. Now, be what? Just be. Be the best me that I can be. And that means needing to be kind and loving to myself so I can keep doing that. It doesn't mean working those crazy 100-something hour weeks if that burns us out, because then you can't contribute to that mission that achieves that vision. My purpose is to just be, so that I can keep most effectively, most kindly, most lovingly, most consciously executing on that mission to achieve that vision. And that is purpose. And the ikigai elements maybe just go in there of like, okay, well, how do you know what that mission or vision should be, and the how that you achieve that mission? Okay, so it helps you get more detailed, but the purpose itself is just to be. And that's where I'm at the moment.
Yeah.
I wonder what you think about that.
So I think it comes back, even from the purpose of what you said there, right? So in those purposes of that person, it was only between the age of 20 to 40 that actually made any money. The rest was all giving back.
Yes.
So if you can say all these other elements of purpose, then purpose doesn't have to be something that makes money at all. And I think the interesting about purpose is that it's just a grand idea, right? And it's in some ways freeing yourself from that, like say, for example, being your purpose is just to be. What you're actually doing is freeing yourself from the cage of having a purpose in the first place. If all you need to do is just be yourself and follow your curiosity and follow the things that make you happy and follow the things where you think you can contribute, that's more of a way of life, which I think is much more aligned with, say for example, I did karate, right? You've got karate do, and the do bit means the way of. So when people say karate, it's actually like karate do, right? So jiu-jitsu, and there's jiu-jitsu and jiu-jitsu, they're like the way these things, it's the art of, the way of, right?
Yes, okay.
So when you think about the way you live, if you think more about it's more about the way you do things as opposed to the goal-orientated side of things, right? So if you care about the way that you raise your granddaughter, for example, or the way you help people, I think that's probably like, and that's where I say I am at the moment, is about I'm caring about the way I do things. Am I doing things in the right way? Am I doing things in a way that I believe in? And if I focus more on that than the actual outcomes, because let's say, for example, you have a target 100,000 followers, right? That's easy. All you need to do is just loads of controversial shit. And you need to, like, for example, if you're on this podcast, maybe like, oh, like, when was the first time you did this? Or like, you talk about sex, you talk about that, right? You're going to get views. Easy. That's reaching that purpose of getting, or that goal of getting 100,000 followers. But the way you did that is that the alignment. I think if we spent more time focusing on the way we did things as opposed to the purpose or the end goal of it, and like I said, the way is being, right? It's the way you are and the person you are being on a daily basis. That I think leads to a more rewarding. And that's within the human confines, the society confines, right? Because you do have to make money. You do have to do certain things in order to have a certain level of living standards and to have a certain level of safety and meet like Maslow's hierarchy and that stuff, right? But once you've done that, it's looking at, okay, why am I doing these things? And that's where, for example, 4,000 weeks comes in, is where purpose comes in, because in some ways, this idea that like your purpose and whatever the purpose is, and like say, for example, Nelson Mandela's, if his purpose was like the freedom of like South Africa, right? That's a big purpose, and he achieved that, right? But if he didn't achieve it, but he tried his best to do it, and he went about it in the right way, so obviously people might know that he obviously did the violent stuff at the beginning, and then he did like less violent towards the end. But if he went about that in the way that he did his best and things are outside of his control, did he have a life of no purpose if he didn't end apartheid? Even though he went about things and he dedicated his life to it too. So I think that's one of the challenges too, when you look at purpose. When so many people, I think, say purpose, also look at goals. And there is that gap, because if you care about what you're doing, if it doesn't end up happening, but you did it in the right way and you were happy about the process about doing it and you were dedicating life to something you really cared about, then is that not a life worth living as well? And the challenge is that it's hard to measure that, because we live in a CV resume world, right? A LinkedIn like achievements world. And so, okay, this is a question that came to me recently. It'd be interesting to hear your take on this. I gave a talk at a school, and one of the kids asked me, like, what's your proudest achievement? And I was like, I don't know. Because none of my achievements really matter to me. Because it's, let's say, oh, I won this award or I got this many followers. Like, so fucking what? Like, at the end of the day. And I think that's a transition I've made in the last couple of years of that. Like, I think it comes with depth and it comes with understanding the limitless and the end of things, right? Is that, so what about any of those achievements, right? But have I lived in a way that I can be proud of? And I think so much of society today and so many people listening, it's about the achievements give their life value. Whereas actually, if you're doing things, to me at least, if I get X amount of followers or get that many followers, it's a target, it's fun, it's a goal, whatever. I don't remember that in a couple of years' time. So say, for example, I did karate for many years, right?
Yeah.
I love the training of it. I love the way I did about it. I like teaching. I love these things. It's the happiest, proudest achievement. Like, yeah, I got a black belt. But that actual day of getting the black belt, it doesn't really stick in my memory as much as me just having this general feeling, but I really enjoyed that time in my life. And that's one of the things I think about now. It's just about everyone's chasing, like, say, for example, I'm going to start applying for awards because awards matter for PR, which means we can make a bigger impact, right? I don't care about any of these awards. And maybe I shouldn't say that on the camera when I'm going to be applying for awards, but none of these awards matter, right? Forbes says in 30, all this X, whatever. It's a little badge. You can't live your life for badges. You got to live your life for things you care about.
Yes. So we talked earlier about rules. And this isn't going to be a very sexy answer because I like to give these like psychological answers that make you think differently, and they don't do well as sound bites. So bear with me. I have a number of rules for my life. So one of the reasons rules are so effective is because when we're younger as kids, even if you don't like them, they mostly work. Well, we can set ourselves rules, therefore. So I have at the moment about 41 rules for my life. And one of my rules is the journey is the destination. The journey is the destination. So treat every day as the destination you're getting to. In other words, we are living the infinite game of life. And the rules of an infinite game are you keep playing until the game ends. So business is an infinite game because you keep going until you die, so you can't play anymore, or the business fails. Yeah. Otherwise, it just keeps going, which is why we get the S&P 500 growing to ridiculous amounts and inflation and these things, because there isn't an end goal to reach. Well, our lives, therefore, too, are also an infinite game. In the infinite game of life, it only ends when you die. So there is no one achievement, there is no one goal that is in any way, shape, or form a destination of anything except potentially a finite game that you are playing within the infinite game of life. Therefore, no achievement matters unless you construct it as being the end goal of a finite game that you consciously choose to play for the sake of it. So if you consciously choose to play a game of football and it really matters to you, maybe because you love it, or maybe it's your career or whatever, and you win a trophy for that, that achievement matters because you consciously chose to make that finite game matter to you. That doesn't mean that it moves, that it is any bigger than that itself, the finite game. So when you say achievement in life, I'm now thinking, okay, well, that's so broad that what we actually need to do is define achievement. How do I know, what do I label as an achievement? Well, I might label my happiness as an achievement, or my general sense of satisfaction, or my general sense of purposeness as an achievement. And then achievement shifts from being a goal I have attained, a goal I get like a trophy, to a state. It's that way of, and I love that concept of way of. I love where this comes into martial arts. Is like I've just done some like a Shaolin kung fu course, nice. And it's this way of being, and it comes a lot into Tai Chi and Qigong as well. It's like these arts, the way of the art, the way of the artist. If my life is living the way of the artist, and I have achieved this sense of purposeness, this sense of mission, this sense of being the me I want to be every day, then that is achievement. And if one day I don't feel that way, but I have successfully trained myself to give myself the love and kindness I need in that day, then that's also achievement. So every day becomes an achievement. When you can consciously label a finite game as mattering to you, knowing that it matters in a finite way, then you can enjoy the achievement. When we make that our whole lives, right? And we all know people, and we're probably all to some extent that person at some point in our life, where this thing I am now that I'm doing becomes my label. I am the tech consultant. I am the CEO. I am the, okay, well, what if that disappears? Who am I?
Yeah.
And a lot of us get that because we're labeling something finite as the goal of the infinite game, where actually the achievement is every single day. Have I been the best me I can be today? Or whatever other thing you choose to label, but it must be within the realms of the infinite game if it is going to be about the infinite game that is life. Because life just keeps going. The journey is the destination.
The classic example is Olympians, exited entrepreneurs, where they achieve the thing they're meant to achieve and they wanted to achieve, but then they can't adjust to life after that. And this is where the balance comes into play, right? Because those finite games can make life more fun, right? If you play a football game and you really care about the result, it can make it more intense. It can get your heart rate pumping. It can make it more enjoyable.
Absolutely.
The challenge, I think, as you said there, is when you're living for that achievement every time. Because then if you don't win, then are you crushed each time? And it's having that ability to go between sometimes where your achievement is a state versus your achievement is a finite thing, right? And being able to flip between that as what works for you. And I think, like you said, there's an art form to that, right? It's not a simple thing. It's about, okay, let's say if I set myself a target for next year, I'm going to do X amount, right? Me chasing that target can be fun. As long as I don't put my entire identity on that particular achievement.
Sometimes I wonder if the challenge we're really getting ourselves into is if the goal we set ourselves doesn't contribute to that thing that is bigger than us, right? So you are trying to achieve certain things with the Bay HQ, but that achieves a vision for the world that is much bigger than you or the Bay HQ could ever be. Therefore, when you are no longer at your current position, Bay HQ, maybe you move on to your next thing or whatever, happens in your future, it isn't my identity is gone because the next thing also contributes to that vision. In other words, like when I think about like an Alex Hormozy, right, where I think his goal at the moment is to do 1 billion in sales or something. I was like, everything he wants is all about, can I make this happen? How do I get to 1 billion in sales? And I'm like, okay, when he's achieved that, who is he?
Yeah.
And his thing, I know what he'll probably do. He'll be like, he'll just set another goal.
Yeah.
Is there a bigger vision that aligns to? I think helps more of us to understand that I can set this big goal that is an achievement, but it isn't defining me because that was set in the first place in service of a vision that is much bigger than myself or something that is much bigger than myself. I'll achieve that goal. Great. I'm the person who achieved that goal in service of that. Now I'm moving on to this next thing that's also achieving new goals that I can set when that happens to also be in service of this bigger thing.
So I think about two founders, like founders in two respects, right? Is that you've either got to be obsessed with the problem you're trying to solve or obsessed with problem solving itself. And I think there's two different parts here, right?
I like that.
You can, so a lot of second time founders, you see that they don't really care as much about, okay, not that they don't care, but like it's less of a passion project for them, right? It's a bit more clinical because they love the process. And I think you can have both elements, right? So say for Alex Hormozy, you can tell he really loves that process of working out how to get to 1 billion sales. That process, that journey really brings him joy. And I think in some ways he cares about the result in so much as that it drives the enjoyment process. But when he reaches that goal, I don't think he's going to have a collapse of personality.
No,
like I said, I think he'll set another goal.
Yeah.
Whereas other people, when that achievement is all that matters to them, then that's when it's more tech because they're not enjoying the process. They're only chasing that goal because of the end goal. So if you can enjoy the process, then you can set yourself goals on finite games and it can make a good life. When you're setting yourself goals, like say for example, someone's trying to get a promotion, they hate their job, they hate their life, but they're only chasing that goal because that's the next goal in their life to get this next promotion. Then when they get their promotion, they're going to be miserable because they're continuing to do a job they hate. So when you look at it in that way, I think that's really interesting too. And the other element of this too, when you look at, say, for example, it's about, when you look at your life, it's about how is the daily life. So say, for example, some people consider getting married as an achievement, right? But it's not really the marriage part that's the achievement. It's the bit that every day you get to wake up next to somebody that you really love and how they make your life better on a daily basis or they improve the way that you live. And I think that's the thing about sometimes, even things when you look outside the professional world, outside of the success, not the success world, but the kind of linear path of career. When it's looking at, say, children, some people look, okay, I have to have a child by this time because that's the timelines. But having a child isn't necessarily an achievement. Like you said, the achievement is like every day you get to like have this person in your life that makes you happier. And it's other elements of your life too. Let's say your family, right? Like, okay, let's say some people, they want to retire their parents. I know quite a few entrepreneurs who've done that, right? Is the goal that they're really proud of, that they retired their parents, is that what makes them happy? Or is it actually that they get to see their parents be stress-free? Is that the bit that makes them happy? And I think sometimes it can be quite easy to confuse the two things, is that the simple act of doing it on that single day, same thing, the day of you getting married, same thing as that the day that these things happen, is that the bit that's happiness, or is the happiness what comes afterwards? And when you think that your wedding day is going to be the happiest day of your life, then but shouldn't the rest of your life be happy because you're now with this person?
You set yourself up for failure.
Yeah. So it's kind of looking at that. I think sometimes people live for the moments, whereas actually it should be about, not it should be, but like how I maybe see it is that it's about the everyday. It's about like when I wake up like in the morning and I get to go and see my best friends, or I get to do this. Like it's like I said, I get to, right?
Yes.
Like let's say you marry somebody and you get to spend all of your days now with somebody who you really love. Isn't that the point?
Yes.
When you work with something you enjoy, you get to work with something you enjoy. You get to have that challenge every day.
Yes. It's the confusion of events with process.
Yeah.
Right? This is the process of becoming versus I see the event such as the marriage, therefore I assume the process must have taken place. The hard work happens in the process. I love that. You used the word a few times of being an outsider. And I'm assuming, I could be assuming wrong, it's because you made those career changes where whenever you did, you were not the typical person there. You were maybe newer. You were carving out your own space. And what does it mean to you to be the outsider? And then how do you stand out in that space despite that? Because every time you do, if you are a walking personal brand, right? We're all our walking personal brand. Every time you make that transition, you're rebuilding the personal brand from the ground up. So how do you do it?
The outsider element, I think it comes from, so I haven't done it yet, but I've probably got ADHD. There's something probably not, I'm on some kind of spectrum.
So
right?
many people, including myself, say this all the time. And I'm like, I feel like we're just all...
Yeah.
Oh,
but so I'm probably somewhere there. I think, so if you look at how I've done my life, right? It means I think differently to other people and the mainstream, and I didn't follow the certain paths other people did. And I think there's an element of sometimes, well, when I was younger, I was a chronic overthinker, and it comes back into different places, whereas now I live much more in the present. But I just always just think and overanalyze things, and sometimes it's the element of I put myself on the outside, I think, rather than the people around me not including me. And that's when, with maturity, I can realize about myself. But when I was younger, I just feel like I didn't fit in sometimes. I wasn't cool enough. I wasn't this enough. I wasn't that enough. And we're looking at career now. Say, for example, I did 7 years in tech consulting, despite not really being interested in tech at the beginning. So it's things like that where the other people I worked with were way more interested in tech than I was. But I learned that skill over time. And it was different in that respect, right? And then the different transitions I've made now with the more entrepreneurial side of things is that each time being an outsider has benefited me. And I think it benefits lots of entrepreneurs because I have a different perspective. So you look at the writing game. I studied economics, which is basically just maths at university. I had no real credentials in the writing space. I didn't study English literature. I didn't do any of that stuff. But it meant that I then wrote the way I talked. So I wrote in a way which was more natural.
Yes.
Because I didn't have the things I didn't know to trip me up. So when I learned all the other skills that other people wrote about, it still maintained some of that naivety that I did things in my own way, which created a personality which made me stand out in that way. And let's say the podcasting side, right, is that suppose the podcasting side shifts all the time. I'm constantly adapting and changing because we already as well. So 350 episodes in, it's hard not to get complacent. So I need to keep switching things up. I'm going to switch things up again next year and make a different style because otherwise it gets stale. And you need to keep adapting and it's not necessarily stale for the audience, it's stale for me doing it.
You get bored. You, in turn, might make the audience bored accidentally, right? Inadvertently.
Yeah. And it also becomes too easy. And when something's too easy, I don't find it as fun, which is probably something that I need to sort out myself.
Well, maybe just the way of being a human, especially a human man. It's like, I need challenge. Oh, fair enough.
Yeah. And then with the podcasting side, again, so from my initial, my podcasts were mainly American based. So me being a Brit, one, like half the people didn't understand what the fuck I was saying on the podcast at the beginning.
Really?
So this is where the current voice you hear,
Yes.
this is adapted because of those early days.
Got you.
Where I had to speak more clearly. I had to slow down. Even now, the way I talk, right, I know that I go up and down and I change the style. It's because I edited myself at the beginning. So if I was monotone, I get really bored of myself. So now the shifting comes and the way my words move, and now I'm conscious of it, so I'm overthinking it. But that all came about from there, right? And I see it as being an outsider is a good thing in many ways, because you don't have the boat clubs and you don't have the yacht club or whatever it is those people do.
Yeah.
But it means that I'm looking at it from a different perspective because I'm having to learn. But it all comes down to, so if we look at the Japanese, so the first article I wrote that went viral was about Japanese mindsets. So it's taking my karate background, what I learned from that. And there's a concept of Soshin, right, which is beginner's mind, of I'm looking at the problems from a naive perspective, which means I don't know the solution, which I'm like, oh, why don't they do things that way? Why don't they do things this way? Which gives me then the freedom to be dumb and to be suck for a bit, but that helps me to do in certain ways. So I'd say for anybody looking to break into this space, being an outsider, like, it makes you unique, because me and you both been in the space, right? Some people can be very samey, and that can be boring as hell, right? Like the last thing you want is another person to do the same old story of like, I'm starting this app that you've heard 100 times. When somebody comes in with a new perspective, that's refreshing.
It perks your ears.
Exactly,
like, oh,
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think people can lean into that more. So, for example, I have the dancing background, right? So, I think I mentioned earlier, there's a VC event a couple of weeks now ago where I was then dancing in front of 50 VCs and family offices. Who else can do that, right? In terms of like Bunga, right? Nobody can do that. They all now remember me, right? And just if somebody else does something, it's like, be cool, right? Like you being an outsider, you being different makes you interesting. Whereas so many people are so focused on how do I become part of the. You need to learn the game. You need to learn the rules of how the game is played, but then not just suppress all the bits that make you different. Because guarantee you, people are bored of the same things. They want to hear something different. And if you can be that difference, and you can be the person who I go to an event and I know you're going to have a cool story from me, you're going to have something different, then I'm going to go and chat to you.
I love it. As we start to wrap the conversation up, I need to know what some of the other biggest lessons you've learned from 350 podcasts are. You've also had some really big guests on. Feel free to do some name dropping, where, we've talked about everything from purpose to infinite game, starting with this sense of kindness, right? There must be hundreds of more lessons. What are some of the biggest that stand out to you that we haven't discussed?
The one I always say to everybody is that no matter how successful, I met a lot of successful people. So Ev Williams was worth a few billion, right? He's the founder of Twitter. He's the guy who invented the word blog. Like, he invented blogger, right?
Wow, okay.
And his other company was Medium. So this is somebody who's basically, he is the online writing space. He did blogger, then Twitter, then Medium, right? If he can be nice to me, and he can also, I remember the interview because he had like a melancholy about him, basically, where he had regrets about, did I do something good by creating Twitter? Because of all the stuff that has come out of Twitter. Like, okay, yes, I've connected the world, I've done these things, but I've also enabled this platform misinformation.
When did you speak to him? Do you remember what year or?
2022 or 2021?
This would have been just
before Elon, yeah.
This would have been before Elon.
Yeah.
And so that's only gotten worse since, which is interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And he had this doubt within himself. And he also said, like, he worked so hard when he was younger. And then he said, now I wonder, was it worth it? And when somebody at that level can show that level of humility, that's really important, because there's so many people trying to prove to everybody they've made the right decisions, they've done everything right in their lives. When you can strip that back and actually properly assess yourself and be that reflective, that to me is way more fascinating. And there's somebody at like 10 million followers. There's Zainab Salbi. So she founded Women for International. She's helped 500,000 women refugees. So there's people like this I've talked to. Every single one of these people eat, sleep, and shit. Doesn't matter how big you are, how successful you are, you still shit, it probably still stinks. They all have insecurities, all have things that they aren't perfect. But it's so easy when you're at the beginning of your journey to put everybody on a pedestal and think they're so amazing, right? But that limits you because you think you can't achieve the things they can do. And there's trade-offs and sacrifices, always different elements of how they've been able to get that successful. But you've got to remember, all these people are still human. And I think that's such an important lesson for everybody listening, is that you can't just be like, rule yourself out, like, oh, there's no way I can do this. Because, for example, if I was like, there's no point in me writing, like, nobody's ever going to read this, what's the even point? I wouldn't be here today. So don't just discount yourself. Like, try it. Maybe it won't work out, but you don't know until you try. And it's still worth trying. And do try in a safe way. Try things in a way that you don't like bankrupt yourself, whatever it is. But just don't limit yourself. That's a big thing I've learned. All these people I've talked to, some of these people got massive successful businesses. Doesn't mean they're the most intelligent. Doesn't mean they're the most anything. But they had the guts to try when so many other people didn't.
So that begs the question for me, how? There's a risk-taking temperament that some people have more than others. Some people have responsibility, others don't have. You mentioned earlier, you don't have kids yet. I'm the same. I don't have kids yet, so it makes it easier for me to take risks. For some people, even if they have none of these physical things in the way, how do I just get started? How do I just go do the thing when I don't know what to do or how to? And you can say, well, go Google it and research and stuff, but the challenge with that is those are excuses. It's the internal how, not the external how. That's challenging. Did you notice any patterns of how they went and just did the thing and just got started?
So a lot of it is accidents. A lot of it is flukes as well, which people forget, right? So it's some people have it mapped out. A lot of people just stumble into it. So you can stumble into things as well and you can mess up, and that could be the thing. But one framework that I think is really good for this, it's from a guy called Tiago, I can't remember his last name now, but it's like a big Brazilian content creator, somebody interviewed in the early days, right? He called it minimum viable fear. So instead of thinking about what you need to do, think about what are the things you're scared of. So, okay, you want to start writing online, what are you scared about? Okay, I'm scared that people are going to read this. I'm scared that people are going to do this and do this. Okay, what about if you wrote under somebody else's name? What if you use a pseudonym? Does that make it easier? Maybe if you wrote on Twitter first, under a fake name, would that be easier? Would you not be scared of it anymore? And then eventually you could work up to then using your own name and doing your own things. But it's looking at that, right? You want to start a podcast? Actually, why don't you just start with doing interviews you're never going to release with friends? Is that something which you're scared of still, or can you do that? If you keep doing that without what's the steps, what's the different fears you have, and you can tackle them to ladder yourself up to where you want to be. And if you look at what I did, right? When I started writing online, if I knew that it was going to blow up as much as it did, I would have used a fake name. I did it was a massive oversight on my part, because I was like, okay, crap, my name is everywhere on the internet now. And it's worked out because I now do stuff in person, so I have to use my real name. But I know lots of writers use fake pen names, which gave them a level of security and privacy that was really good for them. So you can do that, for example, right? Let's say you want to start an app, right? Then why not just what's the thing that's scaring you the most? It's how am I going to learn it? Maybe start a course. Maybe what's the thing? What's the bit that's holding you back? Is it the knowledge? What is it? Like you said, simply Googling it. The challenge with Googling it, like you said, is where there can be an overwhelming amount of information. So if you just decide what's the thing that you're most concerned about, and just tackle that small fear first, next small fear, next small fear, next small fear. Because big thing I always get from people want to start a podcast, which microphone should I use? It's it doesn't fucking matter, just start. You can do all the microphone stuff later on, that's fine. But actually just get into the habit of just having conversations and working out what's comfortable for you and what isn't.
I have to ask you this, because this is a question I go around asking a lot of people, and speaking to so many leaders, I need to know what your perspective is. Mm-hmm. What does it mean to you to be a leader?
So there's a boss versus a leader, right? Is how I see it. So a boss tells people what to do. A leader is somebody who gets the best out of the team. And I think a leader is somebody who gets the best out of others. So that's how I describe it. And I'm pretty sure my employees and the people that work for me are happy, but I consider it as a skill that I don't see it as a core skill that I'm very good at, because I think, one, I'm probably too empathetic, so I overcompensate and I try too hard. Whereas for a business element, you have to be a bit it's like you said, giving people what they need rather than what they want. And I've tried to do that, but I don't know if it's necessarily my strength. But when I look at leaders who I can see that people love to work for or people love to get behind, it's the element of that they make everybody around them better. So if you use the football analogy, right, is that you have the captains in the team where they might not actually be the best player on the pitch, but because they're on that pitch, the way they help the other players, everybody else's performance is raised. So a good leader to me is somebody who can make the other people involved in whatever it is, whether it's charity, organization, startup, whatever it is, can they make all of those people better? Can they be like the X factor?
Yes, the distinction I usually make is between being a leader and the leadership role or title.
Mm-hmm.
You can have the role or title and not be a leader at all
if
you're not showing up as a person. And likewise, you can show up as the leader just in your life, regardless of if you have any title. It can be to peers, colleagues, friends, family, and giving them the energy that uplifts. I wonder how much better of a place the world would be if we did that. I find it interesting to ask someone like yourself who also does a lot of work, not just with like founders who then went on to lead great big businesses, but also smaller time in the ecosystem, because I found myself asking this to a lot of people at one point and still kind of do. And when you talk to people like VCs, people who fund the people, they're not usually looking for it. They don't usually have an answer. And I wonder how many problems that creates in new business. If new business that gets really big, if the leaders that we see or the people in leadership positions get there because they've received funding, well, who's receiving the funding and who are they receiving it from? If those people have no compass for what it means to actually be a leader, then are those businesses going to take us in a good place? And if those businesses are all the tech businesses that are paving the way for the future, is the future going into a good place? I think there's just so much downstream that comes from, do we understand what it means to be, to show up as a leader in here?
Yeah, I agree completely with that. It's with a small scale startup, it's the challenge of a lot of people enjoy the problem solving, right? A lot of people found that I enjoy problem solving. I don't necessarily enjoy like people management. I don't think it's a skill I'm necessarily good at, but I have to have the humility to be able to say, I'm not sure that I'm that good at this. Either I need to spend loads of time and get better at it, or I need to hire somebody who's going to do that role in the future. And that's how we kind of looked at it as, okay, in effect, I'm the lead magnet, right? I'm the person who brings stuff in. I can do externally, I can be very good. As we build this system internally, I don't have experience there. It might be better to get somebody who's got experience elsewhere who comes and does that. We've got our founder associate now, so like Ash has been doing a really good job. Is she somebody who over time is going to want to do that kind of a role? And I think it's about ego as well, right? I don't need to be the CEO in a few years' time. At the beginning, I need to be, or like me and Gova together, because that way we push everything on. But I'm not wedded to the idea of being CEO, because is that the place where I can make the most impact?
Yeah.
Or is it actually by me going out, me doing stuff like this, rather than being in the office and rather than managing the people, where I could actually be better? And having somebody in the team who really loves that people management, get the best out of everybody else, that's a worthwhile person to hire.
Which is so important, because that's where the attachment piece comes in. Am I attached to the title? Well, what if I lose the title or I give it to someone else? Who am I? Well, actually, if it's bigger than that and the title is just something I have to have for now, right? Changes the narrative internally completely.
And I say the big thing for me is just that this is all bonus. 5 years ago, I was just a random tech consultant. I had no social media presence. Nobody knew who the fuck I was. And like even 2 years ago, well, just over 2 years ago, BHQ didn't exist, right? So all of this stuff now, I'm playing a game which I never, ever thought I'd be in. So that gives me some level of freedom, because if this was all collapsed now, right, but I gave my best, then I can still be proud of like, I somehow managed to do this stuff that I never thought I was capable of. And I can still look back on that and think, okay, yeah, like I did something pretty cool, that I managed to help some people, and maybe I could have helped more people, but I did something good. And obviously you want the game to continue, you enjoy the game, but at the same time, it's also understanding this is pretty, the way I think about this, and it's going to get very philosophical and very woo now, but it's just like, say for example, at this table, right? Somebody had to make this table. Like we're recording this on like the cameras, right? Somebody had to invent that shit, right? Think about how many things around this in this world that we just take for granted, and like how incredible it is that people like me and you have been able to do these things that now we just like take for granted, and we do this, we do that. But somebody had to design that, somebody had to build that, somebody had to think about the ways all things work. And I just consider myself very, very lucky to live in the world that we live in. And there's so many more things that people are doing right now. They're innovating, that are helping people across the world, solving new problems. And we can always think about the problems that we have, right? The things that can be solved and what hasn't been done yet. But it's also pretty amazing how much is being done. And like, we're just like evolved apes or whatever we are, right? Who are now doing crap like this. Like, is it like when you think about like the world like that, and like, think about what we've been able to achieve, is just like when we're a crying infant who couldn't walk and couldn't speak, to now being able to do this. You've got to just sometimes take that zooming element out and just like, this is mad, like that we're even doing this.
It makes it so much easier to ask that question of, or to take that perspective of, I get to do this.
Yeah.
How amazing that I get to do this as this like evolved ape who happens to be here for like this teeny tiny speck of time, sitting across having cool conversations with people like you. I love it. Amar, I have a closing question I like to ask everyone on the show. Everyone gets the same question. It's a very personal question. That being said, most of this conversation has been that, so it's okay. The show is called Lost and Searching.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to know, are there any questions in life, or what the biggest question in life is, that you are still searching for the answer to?
I think it's the eternal question, right? It's just about looking at what we're always asking ourselves. I think this is a question we should always ask ourselves ever, is, am I where I need to be? And is my energy going in the right direction, right? It's like, because we can very easily go on autopilot and follow society and follow what we should be doing, what somebody else. I don't know if you see the amount of times I get told, like, you need to do this, you should do this. And it's like, no, I don't need to do any of that. But it's quite hard to have the internal locus of control to be like, is this the right place for me? Is this where I want to be right now? And is this where I feel like I belong? And that answer should keep changing, because if you just say yes every time, then you're like, either you're just very lucky or you're not living very intentionally. But I want to constantly be asking myself that question: am I doing the right thing right now? And is this where my energy should be going? Or actually, do I need to reframe and redirect myself?
I love it. A powerful reminder. Hopefully we ask ourselves, not too often, because then life would just be permanently existential, but often enough. Look, man, I appreciate you so much. This conversation has been so illuminating, really valuable, a lot of things to look up, and a lot of things about your career I've personally learned from at a time when I am looking at making some of those transition into doing more things like writing, more content creation, more guiding, more educating, to show up with more of that purposefulness we've talked about. So look, man, I appreciate you. I appreciate the work you're doing in the community as well. And I appreciate you coming on to share with us today. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Really love the questions.
Alrighty, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. I hope you found it valuable. We've reached a number of really important milestones on this show already. It's only been a couple of months, but I'm so grateful to those of you who not only subscribe, but also who listen this far along, who leave the comments on posts, or who give me really powerful, beautiful messages in response. It's been a humbling journey, and there is so much more to come. If there's something about this episode and the question that we answered, or any of the learnings that you took away, that you want to make sure someone else you know understands themselves, then please do share this episode with them, along with your reflections, teaching other people something that you learned, passing the information on, or even just writing it down for yourself. All help you retain the answers to this, and any inspiration it gave you even more. That's the purpose of all this, is to give you as much positive, powerful, impactful results as possible on your journey to developing your own inner leader from so many different dimensions, not just the one we've talked about today. So thank you so much for being here, sending lots of love, and here's to your success.